what we realized immediately was this next season of our lives and this journey, whatever it was about to look like, was going to be our children's faith journey as much as it was ours. They're going to realize there are going to be things that they learn about God that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. I'm reminded more and more that there are things that don't make any worldly sense, and that if people looked from the outside and looked in, they would think you were crazy. But in God's economy, it makes all the sense in the world.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ministry Wives Podcast. I'm Amy Petersen, and today we're diving into an incredible adventure with Casey Kilgore. She's sharing her family's journey of following God through unexpected ministry shifts. Who listening can relate to that? They spent many years of full-time RV living and traveling across 48 states with their 4 daughters to encourage church planters all across the country. I think you'll be inspired like I was to live open-handed and look for God's hand in every season, even when it doesn't make sense. So join me in my conversation with Casey. Well, hi, Casey. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Amy. I'm excited to be here today.
I am too. I am so happy that you're here with us and really looking forward to our conversation. One of the things in ministry that I have realized is that following God is a great adventure.
Always.
Always. And we get to see his movement in our lives and other people's lives firsthand as we minister and love and serve other people. But I have found it so easy to get comfortable and stagnant to God's leading when he's doing new things in our family. Have you felt that before?
I think it's interesting sometimes, especially as a long time. I've been a believer for a long time and a Christian
Mhm.
and a Christ follower, and so it is interesting sometimes to stop in the middle of life and really be intentional to look for God.
That's so good to look for him because I can kind of look for him through the priority or the filter of comfortable over
Mm.
obedience and really miss what he could be opening up for us and our families.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, and I cannot wait to kind of unfold your story to our listeners and talk about where you've been and where you are now as we seek to live open-handed. And even a yes in a slower season, I think is an important transition to highlight in our conversation throughout the longevity of our ministry lives. On your website, you have just as seasons change with time, so the seasons of our lives change. And at that time, you had said, we have sensed a shift in our seasons and feel God leading us on an adventure of full time RV living and traveling.
It was wild.
Can you take us back? Take us
Yes.
back to that and kind of tell us, first, tell us a little bit about your family and then tell us about what RV living was all about.
Yeah, so my husband Kevin and I have been married for, let's see, we're coming up on 23 years. We have 4 daughters. They're currently 18, 16, 14, and 12. And so back in 2020, 2020 was a wild year for us all. But for us at that point, we had been at our church in South Georgia. Kevin was served in kind of an executive pastor role there, and we had been there for right at almost 15 years. And in 2020, our pastor that we had served under there, he had been at the church for over 20 years. And he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in 2020, and ended up passing away in the fall of 2020. And it was just a very much, as you can imagine, it was a huge shift for the church there. He had been there over 20 years. For us, we had really, since the Lord, years back, put us together. And so for us, we had built a house at the end of a cul-de-sac and planned on raising our family there and following him throughout until he retired, or leading with him until he retired. And so you can imagine, just all of how 2020 went for us all and for the world in general, everything felt a little shifty and unstable. And so that created just a whole nother level of that in our environment. And so we really began to feel the seasons change, and we began to pray. Kevin and I began to pray specifically, God, is this season change in this church going to envelop us? And if so, guide us through that. And so,
Oh, wait, that is a great prayer. Say that again, because I think there's some of us who feel a shifting in our churches, maybe not as tragically as losing a pastor, but say that prayer again, because I think that's something that we can hold on to.
we said, just as we feel the seasons changing, so, okay, God, is that gonna envelop us? How is that gonna impact us? And so I think sometimes it is easy to jump straight to the seasons are changing, okay, but, we'd been there for 15 years, and so we really needed the Lord's leading of, what is our role in this? Are you doing something completely new here? And we need to get out of the way, or are you doing something where we need to, stand even plant a little firmer and lead through? And so we began over the course of a few months, we began to really see that the Lord was doing something completely new there. And so it was interesting because our entire staff ended up completely turning over. And I often tell people that that place will always have a huge part of our hearts. It's where we raised for a lot of the beginning years of our kids. But I believe that sometimes God does things. It's just like when you take apart a bike. You can take apart a bike and use the parts in another place. You don't have to crash the bike to do that. And so sometimes when God, I believe that God changes and shifts seasons by taking things apart, and it's not destructive. That's not destructive. And so that's kind of where we found ourselves in this whole season change.
That's really, really good because I think sometimes we feel like when we are being taken apart or
Mhm.
taken away, that it is a bike crash and
Yeah.
that something has happened. But God does that to rebuild and put you in different places. What an encouragement. That's a great perspective.
So we began to then just ask the Lord, okay, well, okay, God, what's next? This wasn't at all in the plan. And so somewhere in those few months journey, my husband Kevin got an email from the North American Mission Board about a ministry center and some work that was happening. And he began this deep dive really of, hey, there's a lot of things happening across the country with new churches that we were not aware of. And if we were not aware of that, then how many other people are not aware of that? And what part can we play to encourage, this move of the gospel? And so he kind of got a hairy idea based off of an RV vacation earlier in the year. That was completely new for us. We had never done that before. And so he said to me one Friday at lunch, what if we bought an RV and we formed a ministry, an organization, and we just went to encourage church planners all across the country? And I found myself, or I heard coming out of my mouth, I think that's it. And then now I look back and think, oh, wow. How did I say that? Why did I say that?
Like just like that. It was like, I think that's it.
And I think it stunned him as much or more than it did me.
And how
And
old were your kids at that point?
we had one finishing eighth grade, one finishing sixth grade, one finishing fourth grade, one finishing second. And so that began an immediate discussion for us of, okay, we have a kid about to go into high school. Like, this is not the time to pull a kid out of school. And so it began a whole discussion. And I will forever hold some of our family discussions just as God winks in my heart, because that was one of the things that God used to confirm so much to Kevin and I to move forward because it didn't make any earthly or worldly sense. But all four of the girls were very open and embraced this idea and said, let's do it. And that was a huge confirmation for Kevin and I that, okay, God, you're asking us to do something really, really different. Um,
Seriously. And I think that's so interesting and something that is a point of questioning and conversation as ministry families. We go through different transitions. At what point and how do we include or not include
oh,
our
yeah.
children in the
Hmm.
decision? And so, I mean, I guess you guys felt like this was where God had you to begin processing through and figuring out. So, how did that process work with your kids, bringing them into the conversation?
What the Lord really impressed on me and Kevin, and what we realized immediately was this next season of our lives and this journey, whatever it was about to look like, was going to be our children's faith journey as much as it was ours. They're going to realize there are going to be things that they learn about God that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And so that felt weighty to us, because here we're shepherding them, but it felt weighty to really walk with them through it and get their feelings. And we did a lot of discussion around the table in that season just about seasons. And one of the things, I'm such a tangible and a visible learner. And one of the things I talked a lot to the girls about was, okay, outside, I know we do live in South Georgia, so we don't really see seasons change a ton. But what when we do see the seasons change, we get visible signs. The wind starts to blow differently, the leaves start to change color, sort of in South Georgia. But temperature starts to change. What different things happen with the weather, and God gives us signs of the season change. And I think there's so much that we can stop and learn and apply and lay that over just our lives of season change. And so that was kind of the way we talked about it a lot at home was, hey, we're getting signs of the season changing. And the girls could feel that and see that too with everything that had happened to our church. Church just felt really kind of sad and hard and shifty and unstable. And it wasn't just because of what God was doing there. It was just our pastor and his wife were like grandparents to my kids, and so it just had been a hard season, and so they felt that season change too. And so it was really interesting. God used that as really really pertinent confirmation for Kevin and I as we moved forward.
That's really cool. And I love the idea of when seasons change, you can feel it and you can
Mhm.
see visible things happening. And same thing with our lives and being able to teach our kids because I love that you prioritized and really were aware of your kids' faith journey because they are not, in ministry life, you're called to different churches. And what I've learned so much and have held on by faith and hope in the Lord is that they are not casualties to the mission of
That's right.
me and my husband, but God uses all of it to cultivate and create their own stories in ways that we don't even know yet. And so, as you now have the privilege of looking back and seeing your time traveling the country in the RV with your girls at that stage, how have you seen God work in their faith journeys during that time?
So in the late summer of 2021, our RV finally arrived. We set off. We took about 4 to 6 weeks. So we sold our house and all of or a lot of our belongings. We had one small storage unit. And we took off in the RV. And at that point, our journey, we took the North American Mission Board's Send Cities. So at that point in time, they had about 32 focus areas that were cities across the country. And we said, that's gonna be our map and our route. So we took about a month to figure out how to live in an RV, all 6 of us. And so that was kind of August and the beginning of September 2021, but it was so interesting the way the Lord did. Our very first stop and our very first city was Pittsburgh. And we got to Pittsburgh. And so Kevin's process kind of began to be that he would go onto the North American Mission Board's website. There you can get the contact. There used to be a map and it had dots for all of the church plants in a certain area. And so what he kind of tagged as his mission was, I want to turn as many of those dots into relationships as we can. And so he would begin to contact pastors in the area. And so the very first stop was in Pittsburgh. We got to know a church planter and his family, have become dear, dear friends, and we've been there several times now, and and have enjoyed linking arms in ministry. But it just so happened that the week that we got there, Kevin reached out. He was talking to the guy, and the guy said, "It's been a really hard week. I don't know that I'm going to have the bandwidth to connect." And he shared with Kevin that his wife had just miscarried that week. And so Kevin said to him, "Hey, how can we just want to love your family. How can we love your family? Can we drop off a meal?" And he said, "We've got some people around us and food is covered and thanks a bunch." And so about half an hour later, the guy texted Kevin right back and he said, "Hey, I was just looking at your website. Would your girls be coming into the city with you? We were staying just on the outside of the city." And Kevin said, "Well, they can." And he said, "It would be a huge blessing." He said, "If your girls would take my kids and just let them play at the park and just be with them for a couple hours and let my wife just be at home in the quiet by herself just to take some deep breaths for a couple hours." And so it's one of those moments that impacted because at our very first ministry stop, who did God use in that moment? It was the girls. And it was the girls that God needed, and they could see that themselves too. And we often would refer back to that. And that was such confirmation for them even at their ages of, look, God can use us to love on people, and we can make eternal impact by the way that we care for people. Even we can be used. And so before we got too far away from the girls, I wanted to make sure to link that story, because that was a huge, when we look at this last season and journey, that was a huge marker for all of us.
Yeah, and even understanding what your mission was, going to all those cities, and really it was to with your family to have conversations and build relationships with church planners.
Yes, and just to give them out as a kind of an analogy, just a cup of cold water. I heard a sermon years ago about, how can we just show up to people and provide a cup of cold water, just because cold water is refreshment. So that was kind of our mission, is just to encourage them. So what that ended up looking like is sometimes it was just Kevin taking the guy out for coffee and just literally hearing all the things about his ministry, the highs, the lows, Kevin was a neutral person that wasn't tied to any of his funding, but could just be an encouragement. And so sometimes that also looked like there were lots of instances where we got to take their whole family out to dinner. Or maybe the girls got to babysit and we got to take the parents to a really nice restaurant, just because they don't get to do that often. And so it just ended up lots of ways. There ended up being, lots of times that we could jump into their ministry on Sunday, or maybe something they had going on, an event on the weekend that we could jump in and help volunteer, or maybe just relieve some of their childcare workers. There were a couple times that happened as well. So all kinds of interesting ways that we could just really just embrace them where they were at and encourage them to keep going.
Oh, that's so good. I just think that I actually feel that, especially in the heat that we get in the South. I just the fresh cold water of ministry is what is needed sometimes when you're in the grind. And I know for those church planners that are listening and church planner spouses that are listening, and the uniqueness that church planting has in the grind and the joys and the real face-to-face life stories that you get to be a part of, but then also being able to or having to take care of all the things. I mean, the
Mhm.
childcare and all the things. So, what are some of the needs and the struggles that you noticed and saw in the lives of those ministry wives?
Yeah, it's interesting because here's two things that I feel like across the country, whether I was in a rural area, whether I was in a city, an urban area, no matter the context, there were two things that I feel like that in a church planting context, those ministry wives, and I think we can all relate to a certain degree, but perseverance. Like, these women persevere on the regular. We're talking in most instances, there is no building and planning center, and we're talking a space that they've rented where church and a church environment and a worship service has to be set up and put together every single week. Every single week, put up, taken down. And so just that perseverance of showing up. And I always just felt such pride and wanted to encourage them. And you're showing up every week, and just the perseverance to do that. And so that was one thing that I always would talk about, and that I noticed everywhere that I went.
That's so good. Perseverance. I'm telling you what, for you who are listening and you may feel very discouraged and exhausted and don't see an end or even a change in the way that your Sunday mornings look or Saturday evenings, we just want to encourage you and say it is worth the fight. Just showing
Yeah.
up is enough. Is there anything else that you'd want to add in encouragement to that ministry wife?
Just know that this is a spot and a place where we see you. And that's what we see you. We see you showing up. Even if you feel frazzled, we see you showing up. And that was what, I saw these ladies show up over and over and over and over again. And so that was just the thing that was just so encouraging to me, is just the perseverance that they have to show up over and over and over and over again. And then the other thing that I think as ministry wives in general, we can all, no, and especially those of us that are moms, the thing that I saw, just these ministry wives that they carried, the ones that were moms, I saw them carry the whole school situation. And just that is something I think, as God calls us to different places, to different states, to different context, that is something that has to be evaluated in every single context. And in most cases, it has to be evaluated yearly. And so, there's never a right answer or a wrong answer. It's always something that each family has to decide. But the weight of that, like that's something I just noticed and I saw the weight of that because, oftentimes, especially in a church planting context, you're really trying to embed yourself in a community. And so sometimes the best way to do that is through school, but that feels really scary too. And so just watching the moms out there that are ministry wives as they navigated that, um, I just always, wanted to hug them and encourage them to keep figuring it out because it's just weighty for everybody and for all of us, regardless of where we're at.
I'm so glad you gave space to that because I think that's one of the things that we don't talk about a lot because we're just following the Lord and going to the thing and going to the next church or the next, season or the next ministry opportunity, and the Lord will take care of whatever. But the weight that I have carried as a
Mhm.
mom in the transitions and in getting them settled and choosing what school. I mean, I really become a crazy woman when it comes to the school setting and situation. I was a teacher early on and I get it. And so we now have one graduated from college, one in college, and a eighth grader.
Mhm.
And we just recently made this move back to South Carolina. And knowing, since we've lived here before, the school situation, the amount of hours and energy and research and talking to people that it takes to want to make sure that we are following the Lord in the place where our youngest will go was huge on my heart. And so I
Yes.
we get it. We
Yeah.
see you moms who are out there and who are carrying that. And my husband gets it, but he didn't quite understand that the burden
We carry
that
it
it was.
differently as moms.
Yeah. And so for you too, with your kids then being on the road, and did you homeschool
Oh,
them?
no. Well, I did on the road. So I have a business degree. And I thought years ago that I would be terrible teaching other people's kids. I was never going to attempt to keep to do anything with my own. And so the whole time we were in South Georgia, my kids were in public school. We had a good situation there that for that season worked well. And so that was one of the biggest things about our transition and our season change that I don't know if I should say scared me to death. It probably more overwhelmed me more than anything else. It overwhelmed me more than anything else because I felt really unqualified. But then also there's just so much out there. I wasn't even sure where to start and what to do. And so that's one of the personal things in our season for me that I look back and see the Lord's kindness to me in that I had no idea that I could get to a point where I could enjoy the things that we did for school. I knew that I was going to make it happen, but the way that the Lord was kind to me and allowing me to enjoy that time and that season and the things that we did together and the learning, I will always look back to that as His little nugget and gift to me of just the being able to enjoy that. And so, yeah, it's again for us too. It was just the school thing. You have to figure that out, and it feels weighty.
It does. And I love that you said for this season and really to evaluate year by year, there was some kind of expectation in my brain. And I don't know whether it was the movies or what that says for their high school experience, it has to look like this. Or for their whole schooling, it has to look like this. And it was almost like this Mayberry ish, kids playing in the neighborhood and a great school system. And football or basketball. I mean, all this expectation in my head that I thought would bring happiness. And I was really working for that to be the picture. And again, I was working on managing my comfort for the life that I wanted for myself and my kids. And the Lord just, through a variety of moves, just said, Amy, it's going to look different and it's okay. And look what I'm doing because of it.
It's so interesting that you say that because just for my own personal journey in this season of travel, of full time travel, I mentioned that our oldest was going in high school. And so there was a lot of things. I mean, she did all of her high school on the road. And so there were some moments for her and for me of grieving some of that normal stuff. because of what God had asked us to do. There were no prom dresses. There were no. She came out of competition show choir. Like there were some things. Some moments of grieving, some of that we consider normal, and where we really had to one, sit in that, but then also reframe that to see what God had, some of the things God had given her as experiences instead. And so I think just in general for ministry wives, as God shifts and blows our seasons and moves us around, if we're moms, that is something that always is going to kind of just sit heavy and apart in our hearts and minds is just the school thing.
That's really, really good. So you all did that. For how long and how many cities did you hit?
Yeah, so we lived in the RV total about 4 years. So we traveled full time 3.5, almost 4 years. So we had a 42-foot RV, so it wasn't small. It was our little tiny home. And we traveled, we did all 48 states and four Canadian provinces in that time period. I think he ended up logging about 350 different pastors that he met with along the way. And so we met people in every state, in every context, in Canada, and just such an interesting experience from the church perspective and from what we learned, but then also just for our family too. We logged a lot of different things that we saw across the country, just in travels as well.
That is amazing. 4 years. So now, I mean, I just can't even conceptualize that because you're right. Your ninth grader going into ninth grade did all of our high school on the road.
She did all of her high school. She did her dual enrollment. It was, and we had, like I said, you have to. Sometimes I think we just have to look for God every day. We just have to look for the nuggets. And in one of her dual enrollment classes, she, starting her junior year, she did dual enrollment classes with a Christian university here in Georgia. And so she ended up in one of her classes was a girl. It was all dual enrollment kids, and it was a girl whose dad had they were living in Canada because her dad had planted a church. And so, the little nuggets that God would give along the way, just of, keep moving forward. I'm using you to encourage. And so,
Ugh,
anyway, it was
look
neat.
for
Little things like
God, I
that
think.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and even have it in conversation with your kids. Look for God and then bring it up and have that in a conversation with your kids because what you're doing is you're training them and teaching them to
Mhm.
look for him too,
Yep. Every
in their
day.
own lives. Yeah. So here you are now, and you aren't on the road. Kind of tell us what your context and your life is looking like right now.
Yeah, so we did that 3.5 years. We would do the whole our kind of travel. We came back to South Georgia as a home base over the holidays every year, and that was our time to. Everybody went to the dentist. Everybody went to the. We caught up on all the things, all of our appointments, all of our people that supported our organization. So we were always in South Georgia over the holidays, and so our rhythms were kind of we would travel like March to November and then be in South Georgia to take care of all that kind of businessy stuff over the holidays and the first part of the year. And so we did that for 3.5 years, and we began to know. So we had a little bit of an unexpected journey at the beginning of 2024 while we were home for the holidays. Our youngest got really sick. We had no idea what was going on. She ended up hospitalized for 3 weeks, and she was in diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And so it was very much a challenging few weeks and time, but we could see the Lord's hand in all of it. We were so thankful that we were home. And so we knew kind of our network around us as far as in the medical world. But we also knew when she got that diagnosis, she does treatments, like an infusion treatment every 6 weeks. And so we knew beginning then in 2024 that probably 2025 was going to equal, or the end of 2024 and 2025 was going to equal some settling back down for us. So our oldest was graduating high school in May. And then with Caroline, our youngest, needing to get back to treatments and get back to Atlanta, it just the again seasons, and the Lord gives us signs. And so we began to really just ask the Lord. One of mine and Kevin's biggest prayers was to bridge our seasons. Our season of travel, and we learned so much about church. We saw so much, we learned so much about church. And I like to tell people that that season of our lives wrecked our view on church in the best of ways. Yeah, well, you know, I grew up in the Bible Belt. I grew up in Georgia. Kevin had been on staff at churches in, in the South, and so I think sometimes we, especially those of us who have grown up in the culture and in the South of the church, it's easy to forget that it looks different other places, and that church doesn't have to look like pews and planning center and certain worship songs and so I love to share with people all the places that we went to church. We went to church in schools, in bakeries, in dance studios, in strip malls, outside in parks, in an art gallery. I'm trying to think, all kinds of different places. And it was such a picture for us and for our kids that church really is the people. And it's, so little to do with the building, but the people. And so I say all that, it wrecked our view on church, but just that reminder that church is the people and that embedding in a community to make a difference, an eternal difference, and to share the gospel looks a lot like hospitality. It looks a lot like opening your home. I got to share with there was an older lady Sunday school class at the church that I grew up in, and it's people I've known my entire life, that have known me since I was a child, and older ladies. And one of the ladies looked at me and she said, "Well, I need to know, how exactly do you just plant a church?" And it was such a sweet conversation that I got to share with them because they had never been out of the context, of how we do church, and so just to share with them that it looks a lot like a living room, inviting people into your home, opening your doors, hospitality, getting to know people, beginning to share with them and for them to see how the gospel impacts your life. And so just a neat, like I said, I say that it wrecked this season wrecked our view on church, and that's what I mean by that. Just a great reminder. And so Kevin and I really began to ask the Lord, bridge this season as we move back into and frankly, we ask ourselves several times, can we ever go back to being a staff person and go into church in the South again? Because it just feels sometimes like we get into a rut. And so somebody looked at us one time and said, if nobody ever goes back, then how will they ever know that it looks different? And so it was an interesting thought process for us. We had done ministry in the South for a long time, and so it's been interesting to just ask God, okay, take all those things that you showed us and the things that you did in our hearts, and allow us to share that perspective in ministry. And so it's super interesting how He's doing that right now again. I told somebody last week, I said, I'm reminded more and more that God's economy is different than the world's. There are things that don't make any worldly sense, and that if people looked from the outside and looked in, they would think you were crazy. But in God's economy, it makes all the sense in the world. And I think that goes back to that open-handed thing. And so yeah, we knew settling down because of those couple things. Our oldest had graduated, and then our youngest needed to get back to Atlanta on the regular. And so it's been a crazy ride since about March. Been a buckle your seatbelt, grab a Diet Coke in my case, and watch as the Lord has literally, after months and months of waiting and asking, the Lord has just laid out this entire kind of new season for us so differently than anything we would have expected.
Mm, isn't that how he does it? And
Yes.
I mean, I think we short sell our I don't know, our experience with him, but then also our opportunity for ministry, um, when we only accept the things that are within our picture of what it should look
Yep.
like.
Yep.
And, often with fear and elements of distrust going, "Really, Lord? Are
Yeah.
you" or honest
Are you sure
questioning, I
about
don't think
that?
that yeah. "Are you sure this is what you want us to do? This doesn't make sense." And how he so sweetly just lays it out, and I think if I would have told myself in the beginning years of ministry, any piece of advice, it would be, "Don't think you know what God's doing. Be
Mm,
open-handed and trust him."
that's right.
And I think that as we have said yes to him in places in which we were totally surprised or just followed him in obedience in places that were pretty heartbreaking, look back now and I see his beautiful orchestration of growing us and building us and providing opportunity for us in ways that have made us better and more like him.
Yeah, Kevin and I like to say we're gonna put our yes on the table, and then we're gonna wait and let God do what He's gonna do. And like you say. I mean, we said in the beginning it's been an adventure, but yeah, I mean, currently Kevin has we came back, expecting Kevin to step into his full time ministry staff role somewhere. And he actually interviewed several places, and it was one of those situations where, again, to the outside world, it looked like the perfect scenario to step into. And for whatever reason, the Lord we could not get settled about it, and so we decided just to trust that leading, and ended up saying we felt really drawn back to my hometown, and ended up saying, okay. There was no ministry position. The church here is fully staffed. And so but we said, okay, for whatever reason, one week we had a conversation, he and I did, and I said, okay, we're just going to do this. We'll just say we're staying here and we're going to see what happens. And the next week, through a series of crazy God story events, Kevin was offered a job as an accountant. So so he's actually right now an accountant for a healthcare system, but we have continued over and over and over to see God's hand in this job, and to the point that it's overwhelming sometimes. And it just the way that God has confirmed this for this season of his life is just, we would have never predicted it. But again, when you put your yes on the table, and then shortly after the job opened up for him, there was an opportunity for us to buy a house that connected to my family's land, and that's a crazy God story too. The next week, I was able to interview and got offered the job to work at the North American Mission Board with Ministry Wives. And so it's been such an answer to prayer, because Kevin and I had prayed so long that God would bridge our seasons. And we're watching him do that through the opportunities through this job that I'm getting to do, and the ways that I'm getting to love on ministry wives all over the country that I had made relationships with, and then new ones. And so it's been really sweet.
I love that you said bridge these seasons because sometimes I feel like there's no bridge and I'm just jumping from one cliff to the next.
Amen, sister.
But when you look, you can see how God bridges it. And even like the Joseph, he uses each season to layer who you
That's
need to
right.
be for the next season. And I just think that's a great way to say it. Lord, bridge the season and be looking for the ways in which he's doing that.
Well, and you say Joseph, Joseph didn't know. Sometimes God gives us a nugget of how he's bridging, and then sometimes we don't see it until years and years later. And we just have to trust that he has those connections. And as we put our yes on the table, that he's doing his thing in the background.
That is so cool. So tell me just a little bit about what you're doing now with Ministry Wise. What does that
Yeah,
look like?
so excited. So I'm actually on the team, the culture and care team at Send Network. So Send Network is the branch of church planting for the North American Mission Board. And so I'm working on a three-man team with ministry wives. And so our main focus is care for planting wives. However, we're getting to do some really cool things as we go into the next year, as far as just with a broader picture of ministry wives in general. And so we're really excited about just caring for, seeing, hearing, relating to ministry wives all across the country, and women in ministry. So
Mm, that's awesome. How would a ministry wife who is listening and is like, I would love to have a touch point with someone. I'm just need to have some encouragement or someone to talk to. How could she reach out to y'all or what is a website that she can go to?
yes, so for church planting wives, they can find us on the Send Network website, and we have a women's resource page, and so you can find stuff there. And then for any other ministry wives out there that are outside of a church planting context, I will put my email address. We can put my email address in the show notes. But I would love to talk to people out there and just encourage you to press on. It's such a passion of mine for women in ministry, and the opportunities that we get to just see the big picture, and but yet also not, also to be in the present of the everyday and the mundane, and how God gives us the opportunity to look for Him in our everyday lives.
That's so good. Well, in closing, is there like a scripture that you're currently holding on to, or one that was really helpful to you in ministry?
I'm going to read from Isaiah. This is one that a dear mentor friend of ours that we reconnected with in our season of travel. He kind of one of the first times that we were telling them this couple about what we were doing, he said it makes me think about this verse, and he grabbed and he read this verse, and we grabbed it and hung on to it. And I love it. And it's out of Isaiah 45. It's actually several verses. It's verse 2 and 3, and it says, "I will go before you. I will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you treasures of darkness, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by name." And so I love that verse just for ministry wives, especially too, because some days it feels like we really need God to level major mountains. And but just the reassurance that He's gone before us, and that was always mine and Kevin's prayers. We went into a new city. God, go before us, put those people, bring those people to the forefront that we can encourage that need a cup of cold water. Go before us and then level the mountains. But then it also talks about the riches in secret places. And I think that's just such a good reminder to look and to pay attention, because He's going to show us those riches. But then also just the reminder that He is God, and that He calls us by name. And so He calls each of us by name for a certain, moment in time.
Isn't that true? And takes a part of the bike and not necessarily to
That's
wreck
right.
it, but to take a piece and to use it in different places. And
Yep.
I just want to, at the end of my life, I just want to say, Lord, I just laid it all out for you and I put my yes on the table, and there's no regrets in my way of being able to live this life of adventure
Mm.
with you. And then continue the adventure for all eternity, I guess, with
Yes,
him.
that's right. That's right.
Okay, so it's so interesting that you would say church is people. And I think that one of the things that renovated my perspective of church too was seeing people as people and not just a seat or not just someone that I have to deal with. And we have only been in established church settings. And have not been in the church planning world, but that still plays for
Mhm.
me in such sweet ways, because there was a season in which I was really kind of in the drudge of Wednesday nights and, you know, Tuesday evangelism and just kind of the rhythm of the normal of kind of being lulled to sleep in the normal rhythms of church. And the Lord just said, "Are you seeing the people?" It was through a devotional. "Are you seeing the people that I have brought right to you toe to toe?" And so I began praying every Sunday, "Lord, I just pray that you'll open my eyes to see people as you see them. And may I step in obedience to conversations that they are praying to you to have. And may I be obedient." And so it was such a new kind of adventure with the Lord, because
Mhm.
every Sunday morning, it didn't become the doldrums as in ministry, but Lord, I was excited. Who are you going to bring? What conversation are you going to bring? And how can I really step into and see this person and see the open door of encouragement and pointing to you that you can have. And so I just think that that is the essence of it all. Because I mean, even going further, Jesus, when he was on this earth, was beyond the sanctuary, was beyond the synagogues, was beyond all that, but he was seeing people on the streets of who they were, or seeing the Sadducees as who they were. And I think that that is a great reminder for all of us in ministry life and ministry leaders, to just see people as people.
And to look, I mean, again, we go back to, you have to look for where God is in your everyday. We have some other dear friends who are missionaries overseas, and he talks about every day that that God has prepared someone for you, and so he talks about looking for that God prepared person every day. And I think that's what it is. Even in our mundane, God is going to call some of us to move our family across the country to a place where there's only one church, to plant another church and to embed in that community. But God's also going to call some of us to look for the people at the grocery store and at the school and at the ball field, and look for those God prepared people who need to hear about Him that day.
Oh, I love it. That is just so good and such an encouragement to keep our eyes open
Mhm.
and be
Yep.
obedient to the Lord's leading. Well,
Yep.
Casey, what a fun conversation this was. And I am just encouraged myself in my own adventure with the Lord through your story. So, Ministry Wife, we hope you're encouraged right where you are with our conversation. And Casey, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Wow, wasn't that so good? Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Ministry Wives Podcast, a production of the North American Mission Board. We would love for you to follow us on your favorite streaming platform as we have honest conversations every week about the ministry wife life in our Season 7 10-part series. And if this conversation was encouraging to you, share it with a friend who might need the same kind of encouragement. All right, well, we'll see you next week.